The Energy Transition Podcast takes you directly to the cutting edge of the global energy sector's shift, with a specific focus on the critical role played by oil and gas, as well as the pathways developing around a lower carbon future. Your hosts, Leslie Beyer, Energy Workforce and Technology Council's CEO, and Dan Pickering, founder of Pickering Energy Partners, are joined by Josh Lowrey, president of Upright Digital. Each episode engages industry thought leaders in an exploration of market-moving trends and topics, including new technologies, ESG, capital markets, inclusion and diversity, workforce innovation, regulatory influences, and the voice of the people. Join us as the Energy Transition Podcast looks at the state of the traditional energy and oil field service sectors, emerging technologies, and the path ahead in a world of lower carbon energy development.
Welcome to the Energy and Transition Podcast. My name is Josh Lowrey. We are coming to you live from the Upright Digital Studios in Houston, Texas. I am joined, as usual, with the co-host extraordinaire, Mr. Dan Pickering. Hello, Mr. Pickering.
Josh, great to see you.
Good to see you, too. This is twice in 1 week I've seen you. It is a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you. And for our listeners who have no concept of time and when all this happens, it's December 8th or something like that?
December 8th, yes.
So the holidays are upon us.
They have arrived with Thanksgiving in the rear view and Christmas in front of us, and Hanukkah is alive, and it's go time. We are right here.
Yep, absolutely.
So usually I start these podcasts by bragging about something awesome that I've done, but I went to something this week. There's no chance I can top this, so I really need to talk about you for a minute. We went to the Hart Energy 50th anniversary Hall of Fame party, which was incredible. And you were honored as an ACE. And what does the ACE stand for?
Agent of Change in Energy.
Okay. And the Agent of Change in Energy was a group of people that was honored for their role within the industry for now. And but that's really a group of people that is doing exceptional things and has done exceptional things. And really what it is, Dan, is it's the future Hall of Famers of the energy industry. And what that group was doing was, for the 50th anniversary, is they were honoring the 50 inductees, the initial class of the Hall of Fame class of the oil and gas and energy business, which you were the MC for one of the panel, or the panel, not one of the panels, up on stage for the event.
It was fun, Josh. I mean, a couple of comments I'd make, which was, it's the first thing, it's the first time they've done this. It's their inaugural Hall of Fame folks. And I mean, it was an impressive list, and a good chunk of those folks showed up. And so I've never been to an event that had as many sort of heavy hitters in the energy business in my life. And it was really cool to meet and see some of these people that you've only heard about. And so they did a great job of capturing kind of some giants in the industry. They listed them alphabetically, but Red Adair was the first one, right? A in the alphabet, but Wild Well Fighter, I mean, just a legend, right? And so it was a really cool event. And then these aces, the 20 aces, are basically, we're the young pups. I'm 55, but we're the young pups in the business. But you're right, I did moderate this panel, which was so on stage with Harold Hamm of Continental Resources, Tom Petrie, a legend in the financial services business, around energy, and then Chris Wright, who speaks more eloquently about energy and energy dynamics and decarbonization than anybody I know. And so it was just really fun to sort of be in the mix there. It was a great time.
Well, you are a very humble guy, and you won't pat yourself on the back like I will pat you on the back. But truly, it was
just keep your hands on my back.
Yeah, no, I'll give
please.
You a hug. It was a great. Truly, it was a pleasure to watch you up there as your friend, and you really are a great guy, just as a person. I tell people this all the time that ask about you. You do care about the industry. You do move a lot of big puzzle pieces for the industry, and really watching you kind of keep those guys, on point as each one of them, like, hey, you have 2 minutes, and trying to get them to stay within the time limits was impressive.
Managing those three personalities with a timeline
Yeah.
or a deadline was exciting, challenging, and fun for sure. Well, you're very nice to say that, and I think I'm going to move us along to the main topic of today, and I think that our guest today is going to be a lot easier to keep on deadline and
I don't know. He was there.
He was there, and we're excited to have you. So Dilanka Seimon, thank you for joining us. You're the EVP and Chief Commercial Officer at EnLink, and for those of you that are listening and like to follow along or poke around on websites, EnLink's website is www.enlightening.com. So Dilanka, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invite. It's good to be here. Yeah,
Good to see you.
And twice seeing you guys this week as well.
Exactly. This is, it's a homecoming practically.
What did, before we get going, what did you think about that event?
My kind of thoughts the same as Dan. I don't think I've ever been in kind of one room with so many kind of heavy hitters, people who've really been the kind of the pioneers and kind of the godfathers of the business, particularly in the US. It was really remarkable.
Yeah, it was great. And
everywhere you looked, it felt
Seriously.
like, oh, there's that one.
right. and the CEO of EnLink was one of the aces. So it was, it was really neat, really, really neat. And folks like, Larry Nichols, who's this ex-CEO of Devon, and Rick Muncrief, the current CEO of Devon, were both inducted. It's just kind of fun to see kind of the generations there, and folks that are synonymous with the business. Yates,
Yes.
George Mitchell, folks who you hear a lot about, and it was really
When they
cool.
opened up with the picture of Red Adair, that really struck me.
That was cool.
That was pretty
It was
cool.
very
yeah.
cool. So.
We got big shoes to fill in this podcast.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
lucky
After
guys, both of you.
having talked about legends,
That's right.
This is the podcast where Dilanka is going to become a legend. So we always start kind of with the same spot, which is just tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? How'd you make your way into this business? What have you done?
Sure. So I'll start right at the beginning. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, beautiful island on the other side of the world, far away.
Coffee
And tea.
Okay, coffee and tea.
Primarily
Okay.
tea, and then some coffee as well. Had a great childhood, amazing family, my parents, my sister, a lot of extended family and friends, unique and fun experiences growing up. And then I got a very good opportunity, was really lucky really to get a Rotary International Scholarship to go to university in the US. The university they sent me to is Georgia College and State University in Middle Georgia.
Okay.
So I went from Sri Lanka to Middle Georgia, studied economics and finance there, had a great time. And then I joined a mentoring program during college that they matched students with some executives in the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And a turning point in my career, and maybe even not a overstatement to say in my life, would be when I was matched with Paula Rosbeth Reynolds, who was at that time the CEO president of AGL Resources, the
Atlanta Gaslight. Yeah.
Correct. The
Okay.
utility which under her leadership grew substantially and was eventually sold to Southern Company. And Paula went on to have various leadership roles in the energy sector, now sits on the board of GE and BP,
Wow. Okay.
etc. And she facilitated my first role in one of AGL's subsidiary companies, their trading arm, Sequent Energy here in Houston, where I spent the next 9 years. I started off in scheduling and did stints in structuring, business development, origination, and finally trading. So that was an amazing time, during that kind of 2003 to 2011 time frame. That was on the back of kind of the Enron.
Right. Enron had just blown up. Yeah.
And then that's when kind of we were thinking of importing LNG, And then, 6 years later, looking at exporting LNG, shale was just coming on, massive build out in power gen, gas storage, etc. So fascinating time to kind of learn and kind of get that vantage point from on the trading side, being the intermediary between the producers and the consumers.
Yeah.
So that was really a great time, and I'm very fortunate to have got that start. From there, after a short stint, by the way, during that time, I also went to business school at Duke, and also got married to my amazing wife, which clearly is the best decision I've ever made. And then
And you met her in college?
I met here in Houston at a party. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay.
Also Sri Lankan. So
Oh,
that was,
no way.
Yes, way. Yeah, that was quite unique and fun. And then from there I went to 2 short stints at Wells Fargo Commodities and Southwest Energy, all in trading roles, and then went to BHP. It's one of the world's largest mining companies. BHP famously spent $20 billion getting into the shale business. And a couple of years after that, I had the opportunity to lead the gas and NGL marketing and midstream group that was really responsible for optimizing the equity production in the US, and then getting it from kind of the wellhead to consumers. So I did that for a bit, and I spent really the next 8.5 years at BHP in multiple roles. I did a role in strategy and planning, and then as general manager for all the hydrocarbon commodities we produced in this part of the world and then globally. And then my last role at BHP was leading the team that did 3 things. One was kind of the trading and marketing around production globally around oil, gas, and NGLs, as well as procuring energy for the company. So buying diesel, power, gas for our mining operations globally. And then the third part was the commercial accountability for our decarbonization and energy transition related activities. So
what year was that?
This is like 2017 time frame. That was the time when BHP kind of started thinking about decarbonization. Well, they've been thinking for a while. That's when we started thinking about putting some targets around it. 80% of our scope 1 and 2 emissions came from the use of diesel and power. And then
in the mining process primarily.
Correct. In the mining process. And then our team was responsible for buying diesel and power for this. So we went on a journey. How do we decarbonize the power use? Did a lot of renewable PPAs, Australia, Chile, etc. And on diesel, what are alternatives? And by the way, there aren't many in the near term. More on that later. But as part of that, we started a carbon desk in Singapore, did a global RFP for nature-based offsets as well as industrial offsets, kind of an origination effort there. So that was a really good time, probably one of the coolest roles I've had, just a good vantage point on the energy system, as well as kind of that was when energy transition kind of started becoming kind of a big theme towards the end of the last decade. And kind of my insights from that role was that as we balance kind of energy security, affordability, and sustainability, infrastructure will be a theme and be ever more important. And I thought it'd be cool to go someplace and build a business around energy infrastructure. And I thought, a best place to do that would be at a bigger firm that had existing assets, strong balance sheets, the capability, knowledge, etc. And that's what led me to Energy Transfer to set up their alternative energy division, looking at opportunities for energy transfer in carbon capture storage, hydrogen, ammonia, low carbon fuels, etc. from the infrastructure side, not in the production of it, but on the moving it. Correct. And I was actually having an amazing time there, a lot of fun. Energy Transfer has built a remarkable franchise over the last 2.5 decades, and it was a fun role. And during that time, I got called about this role at EnLink, Chief Commercial Officer, and EnLink also has a very good asset base, and as well as have leaned into the low carbon space in CCS, etc. So I thought that was a great opportunity to be part of a growth story. Jesse Aronivas, who's our CEO, was putting together a team really to put the company on a growth trajectory. And I thought, have the commercial oversight of the traditional energy business that makes the money today, but also accountability for the carbon solutions team that is developing new energy infrastructure would be a great opportunity. So that's what got me here today.
Do you live in Dallas or Houston?
Houston.
Okay. You've never lived in the DFW area though?
No.
Okay.
But I travel up to Dallas.
I would think
every week.
Yeah. Okay.
He knows both the Southwest Terminal and that highway very, very, very well, I'm sure.
45 or
exactly.
or Love Field, one of the two.
I usually fly because I'm not a good driver and I don't like driving that much.
Yep.
So I usually fly up.
Okay.
If he did drive, he would be listening to the Energy in Transition podcast the whole
nice plug.
up
See
way.
how good we are? We just smooth.
That's right.
Throw that in there.
So Dilanka, just EnLink for a second. Help us for those folks that haven't gone to the website yet or don't really know. I know it's a billion and change EBITDA business, so I mean it's a big business, but what is the business? Tell us a little bit about EnLink.
Sure. So EnLink is, I would describe as an integrated energy infrastructure company for natural gas liquids, and crude oil. We own and operate gathering, processing, treating, transport, fractionation, storage, and terminals.
Okay.
Right? Taking these commodities, gas, NGLs, and crude oil from producing regions to demand centers. We have leaned in to the low carbon infrastructure space. More on that later, particularly around carbon capture storage being the transporter for that. We are about $6 billion market cap, publicly traded company, as you mentioned, about 1.35 billion EBITDA, about 1,000 employees. A great asset footprint with growth opportunities both in the traditional energy space, but as well as in the low carbon space.
They've had a great 20-year run, EnLink. They've done a lot in the last 20 years.
Yep.
That's where I asked you where do you live. I've had some friends that have worked for that company, and they've just done well over the last 20 years. They seem like their management team is smart. I'm sure you mentioned a couple of the people, and didn't you say one of the guys was?
He was one of the aces. The CEO, Jesse, was an ace.
I mean they've got good people up there. I'm sure that. How do you enjoy working there so far? I mean, because you're
it's great. Look, the company culture is great. You're right. They've built again. Remarkable franchise over a couple of decades, very good assets, good people, and a lot of growth opportunities for us.
Yeah. And one of the things, Josh, our podcast has been primarily folks like Dilanka that are straddling conventional energy and new energy. But when you talked about the growth of EnLink, if you think about what the U.S. has done on the traditional hydrocarbon side, I mean, we've gone from 75 BCF a day of gas production to 105. We've gone from 5 million barrels a day of oil to 13, shale boom, all that. And so everybody tends to think about upstream when they think about that, but it's all got to move.
Yeah.
Right? It all has to get from point A to point B or C or D or whatever point it's going to. So Midstream's been a really kind of sneaky winner and all that because
big time,
because the volumes move regardless of the price. So that's a pretty sweet spot to be when you're getting paid if oil's 50 or 150. So as you said, Dilanka, you started in gas trading and moved through various sort of leadership roles, and now I think you're one of the top 5 or 6 guys at EnLink. So talk to us a little bit. If you went back and looked at a hinge, was it you kind of got out of the trading business, but I mean, was that a defining moment for you, or how do you think about key elements of getting to here?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. First of all, I'm very fortunate to have kind of stumbled upon the energy business, as I had described how I got there, which is just so dynamic and has lots of very, very good people. Really enjoyed it. Now, one of the key kind of decisions was indeed when I joined BHP, having spent about 10 years in kind of the trading side in the US, kind of learning the gas grid, etc. going to BHP was kind of a departure from kind of more the trading, kind of the frontline roles like that, to a multi-commodity but much more global perspective. And that was kind of really fun because it kind of broadened kind of my vantage point on the energy system. And then the second point was when I left BHP to go to Energy Transfer to kind of dabble in new energy infrastructure. That was a bit earlier, as it was getting started.
Yeah.
So to have kind of a front line seat around what are the challenges, what are the opportunities in trying to develop this energy system for this energy evolution. So
that's what that 2017.
Correct.
That's why I was asking you what year that was. And one of the themes that we hear on this with the guests is a lot of, the people that we have in here are these early adapters, and they see it. Did you see something coming? Were you trying to look for the next thing, or is it? You seem very prepared, so I don't think that much of your life has been happenstance. Are you kind of looking at where the puck is going to be, for lack of a better metaphor? How did you know it was going to be there?
No, I can tell you, can't take credit for that. It was really my role at BHP, I think, which really helped. So around that 2017 time period, that is when we were kind of really starting to look at what are the levers to decarbonize power use, what are the levers to decarbonize diesel use.
Okay.
And our team had kind of the commercial accountability for looking at that. We had a technical team that looked at the technical levers and kind of the merging of those to like, okay, what makes sense?
What's possible?
What's possible and when? And if we don't have something today, what might be emerging ideas? And that is kind of where I kind of got the kind of on-the-job training, so to speak, which then in 2021 is when I made the call to go into Energy Transfer to kind of do that more.
Okay, that was 21.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're going to spend a lot of time in the low-carbon side, but you've been around all pieces of this business for a long time. We've got LNG exports and all of those issues here in the States right now. How do you think about gas and the kind of the future of gas? What's your target for LNG exports? Or, just, again, you're watching it. Tell us where it's going.
Yeah, so first of all, if you were to think about gas, first of all, gas is pretty abundant and extraction methods are pretty homogeneous, right? So which means gas is always going to be pretty well priced and affordable. So if you think about it from the lens of kind of the energy trilemma, so gas is an affordable fuel. It occupies about 25% of the global energy mix today, as does coal. Coal is about 25% of the energy mix. So coal to gas switching is actually one of the best levers we have for decarbonization, because gas is much more lower carbon footprint than coal. And then we've figured out a way to transport gas, store gas, transport it internationally via LNG, etc. And we've continuously tweaked that to where we've reduced the costs in that chain. So in that respect, natural gas is a very versatile fuel. And even with what I'm sure will be a remarkable continued growth in renewables into mid-century, I think gas will continue to play a significant role in the energy mix, particularly in the context of that the world is continuing to need more energy.
Yes.
And there's a substantial amount of the world that doesn't have access to continuous energy, right? The part of the world that I grew up, for an example, right? So I think gas plays a huge role, and then in the US has a great opportunity to kind of produce this sustainably, produce it well, responsibly, and then export it. So that's not only bodes well for the energy producers in the US, but also for the midstream companies, the infrastructure companies like ourselves.
Everybody moving it. Yeah. Do you think that one of the things, and I've talked about this for a number of months now and haven't done the work, Russia and the Ukraine and cutting off Europe, and everyone's kind of trying to step in and fill the void of 20 BCF a day of gas that was going from Russia to the European Union. Do you think we'll oversupply in the rush to fill the gap? Are we going to have too much gas on a global basis at some point, or does that market sort of normalize because LNG is so expensive it's hard to oversupply the market because everything gets contracted?
look, in the energy business, we are kind of famous for rising to the occasion very quickly, particularly in the US.
Right. Yes.
And that does create these swings. But I go back to Dan, kind of the fundamental role of gas as part of the energy mix, right? So while there will be periods of oversupply and undersupply, over time through mid-century, I think gas will continue to have a strong bid globally.
You think we'll get coal use down?
Yes, I do think that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you
Through just conversions?
by replacing it?
Just
By turning it off and turning on. They're still building coal in China, but other places are trying to push pretty hard.
Which is why I think it's crucial to build the infrastructure, not only from the U.S. perspective. I mean, there's a lot of gas in the Middle East. There's a lot of gas in Australia and other parts of the world. That's the good thing. There's unlike oil, gas reserves are actually quite abundant, and there's kind of the extraction methods have been tweaked over time. So it's the infrastructure build that is necessary to kind of get that to the right places, as well as then export it, liquefy it, regasify it, get to the demand points.
Talk to us. We've talked about gas. Talk to us about, this is high level, but I mean, net zero. Should we be trying to get to net zero? Do you think we can? What sort of time frame? You're living in this world now for 6-7 years or more. So what do you think?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say, like, my personal view, right? Not necessarily company view, but my personal view on net zero is this: if we as a global community say we have to get there at any cost, no matter what, I think technically, with what we know now and with some reasonable assumptions on technological advancements, we can get there.
So
now,
it is feasible.
It is feasible. But it doesn't mean that we will or that we should, because in doing that, we will have to make choices, some harsh choices, right? It will require kind of investment dollars. I mean, you've heard the numbers. I mean, it's almost silly to kind of think about going into this space, trillions of dollars going into this space, which means it'll come at an opportunity cost of it not going to other spaces like building roads and airports and dams and other things, right? So money will flow. Money will have to flow there. It will mean increased energy costs, and the people who will be most impacted by that are the multitude of people living in non-OECD countries who are energy impoverished today. So their opportunity to emerge from that situation to a situation that kind of some of the developed countries enjoy today is going to get compromised. So you will have to make these choices, and some of these are pretty brutal. So I don't know whether we will, as a global community, will be able to coordinate to do that, and what the unintended or sometimes intended consequences might be. So that's why I think the path to net zero, while technically possible, they have some real constraints to it. Now, absent some technological kind of innovation and scale and acceleration,
cold fusion,
that we can't see right just this second.
Josh and I were talking before we started recording. It's the end of the year. Nobody really wants to come and do a podcast the week of Christmas. No surprise, but we're talking about putting together this sort of best clips from, I think we recorded 12 or 18 podcasts this year.
Walker stepped in for you.
He did. But I think that discussion of net zero is going to make the best of.
That was a great explanation.
Just because it was so, right, you said we can, but whether we should or will, still up in the air.
Congratulations.
Which I think is,
you've done it.
Yes.
That was really, that's right. That's right. We're gonna
Lauren, mark it. He's done it. That's going in the clips.
Right. So Dilanka, you're the chief commercial officer, which means, I think the way you described it to me is you're out in front of your customers all the time. So what are the customers? And I assume that means the big industrial companies, et cetera. What are the hot buttons for them around, low carbon, decarbonization, et cetera? What do you think is important to them?
Look, I think a lot of our customers are really grappling with the scale and pace in which they lean in to the decarbonization space. Now, in the US, of course, the policy support helps some of them to kind of take those first steps necessary.
This is the IRA and tax credits.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. But what everyone's thinking about is where and when might consumers' propensity to pay for low carbon commodities emerge, right? And I've been kind of thinking about it, since the mid part of the last decade, and we, there's some evidence that maybe the kind of the pet chem related kind of plastics and those consumers might have some propensity. Some of the in vehicles, for an example, in EVs, you've demonstrated that those consumers have some willingness to pay, but it has not emerged very, very clearly.
And I want to just clarify, propensity to pay, meaning folks are interested if the IRA is paying for it.
Correct.
But you're saying, nope, I'm going to put a cost on carbon and I'm going to pay to abate. And so I want to spend my hard cash to do it. And it sounds like folks are trying to figure that out and they're not rushing.
People want to do better, but at what cost?
That's right. So while the policy support maybe helps them to get going now, over time, there has to be, it has to normalize somewhere and someone has to pay for it, right? So whether that gets translated to a tax that everyone pays, or is it more per commodity where people can choose to pay or not, that's the big question.
And what industries, again, think back to your BHP days as well, what industries do you think are most forward-leaning? You said maybe plastics, but is it different? Is it different by, some care more about carbon capture, others are thinking about hydrogen, or is it all kind of a blanket in the minds of the clients these days?
Look, I think when you're looking at decarbonization, first of all, you have to think about kind of the abatement cost per sector. I think this search for like a silver bullet is a tough proposition, right? So you just got to try to figure out what is the best decarbonization solution for that particular use case. And going from kind of the BHP days, we found, like, for an example, for nickel, we found that some consumers in the battery space would pay a little bit more for kind of sustainably produced nickel. As I mentioned, in the plastic side, I mean, there's some evidence that there's a interest in paying for that. In the aviation space, you can buy kind of carbon offsets for your flights, things like that. So there was
SAF too,
some evidence there. So then SAF is one thing that enables that.
What is SAF? Should I?
Sustainable aviation fuel.
Okay.
Yeah.
United. Actually, now that you say that.
Cooking oil to jet fuel.
Okay.
Kind of.
But there is not a whole scale sector where you can say, okay, this sector is clearly the leader. Not yet. Yeah.
So you guys, EnLink, as a midstream company, you're focusing on the low carbon. You called it an area of opportunity, which is, we've come quite a ways, Josh, I would say, in the last 5 years, because the traditional oil and gas industry was perceived as fighting decarbonization for a long time, and I think particularly the midstream and the OFS sector are sort of waking up to, it's like, wait a second, we can make money at this. So
I don't mean to hijack your interview here, but on that note, my conversations are changing with the friends that we have in the oil and gas industry. With the term ESG is, people are dissecting it a little bit differently now, and they're understanding that that term doesn't mean what they thought it did. It doesn't have this totally negative connotation. They're able to tell exactly what it means, and they do know that, hey, we're doing a lot of great things now, and that we need to highlight the E, the ES, and the G. And then they talk about, in that same vein, here's what we're doing with regard to our clean drilling, and here's what we're doing to our digitization. And I heard this conversation just within the last week, And there was 1 out of 5 people that was really just hammering on, that term and that whole, we do oil and this is how we do it. And the rest of the 4 people were kind of pushing back on him. And I thought this conversation wasn't happening a year ago. And I was thinking, basically this podcast is working. I will take full credit for
there
this.
you go.
But I mean, really the conversations, all joking aside, like these conversations, as you said, an area of opportunity that big companies are taking, viewing it that way. This wasn't happening a year or 2, 3, whatever the number is, however period of time. So I agree with you. And you're right. They are looking at it differently.
Yeah. So you guys have several carbon capture projects. And so maybe let's, I think a year ago, November of 22, or maybe October of 22, there was an announcement with you and Exxon. I want you to talk about that. And then just last month, you've announced a new project, a different project in partnership with BKV. And so tell us about those so we can kind of understand what it really means for a midstream company to be in the low carbon business.
Sure. EnLink was, I think, one of the earlier midstream companies to kind of lean into opportunities in this space, and that was actually one of the points that kind of brought me to this role. And you said it right. EnLink's been looking at opportunities in this space for several years, and last year was able to do a deal with Exxon to be a transporter of CO2 to support their low carbon energy division's ambitions in the CCS space.
Yeah.
Focused in the Mississippi River corridor.
Okay.
Which is where EnLink has most of our downstream assets.
Okay.
That was a good opportunity for us because that is kind of our home base, if you would. EnLink owns 2 of the 4 market systems that take gas to the Mississippi River corridor industrial region, which has about 80 million tons of CO2 in that area. And Exxon was developing a integrated CCS solution for them, and it was a great opportunity for us to partner with them on the transportation bit. Now, we are working with others as well in the same region. There's a lot of emissions, a lot of nearby sequestration site, and our strategy as EnLink is not to be involved in the capturing of CO2 nor the sequestration of it, but just be the transport provider of choice.
You are literally in the
Louisiana.
middle. Yeah.
That's right.
And so, Dilanka, 2 questions around that. One is, tell us about how it physically works. This CO2 is going in repurposed gas pipelines, or is it going to new lines? So do you build new stuff or repurpose old stuff? Question 1. And then question 2 is, I think back to a couple of years ago, Josh, when we had some CCUS guests on, and things weren't really moving. It was a concept, but the emitters, that 80 million tons, didn't know what to do. We've had the IRA since then. I mean, are these things breaking loose now? I mean, is this about to really be a much bigger business?
Look, it is breaking loose, but it is slow.
Yeah.
It is slower than most people would like, because these are difficult things to do. Right, which is why I think the oil and gas sector, the traditional energy players, are pretty well suited to do this stuff because they're used to doing difficult things.
Yes.
Right. It is going to take some time to get there, but you are seeing some transactions happening, some of the FEED studies happening, and some of these projects getting FID'd.
FEED study, front-end engineering design, and
Correct.
FID is final investment decision, right?
That's right.
Okay.
If you were to think about our BKV partnership in North Texas, natural gas processing is one of the lower hanging fruit for carbon capture because, natural gas comes out of the ground and it has a bunch of different things, H2S, CO2 amongst them. And you're already separating the CO2 from the methane before the methane goes into gas pipelines. So you already have a CO2 stream.
A pure
that is
CO2
pure,
stream.
right? That was previously being vented. Now we are capturing that, about 210,000 tons a year worth of it, and then partnered with BKV to sequester it. So that's a good example of where EnLink has moved pretty quickly to, do what works today.
Right.
That's a great
In
example.
partnership with someone who's an expert in the subsurface part.
And Dilanka, that's an example where, EnLink is an emitter, correct?
Correct.
Right? So you're not just moving other people's CO2. You're saying, hey, we're creating some and we're going to do something with it.
That's right.
And in doing so, is that a NPV positive decision given the IRA? Do you make money by taking that CO2 and sequestering it? Is it a...
Yes, it is. In this case, it is accretive because it's a concentrated pure stream CO2.
Right. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on
That's right.
capturing,
Nearby
yeah.
sequestration site, etc. So it's all about then doing what works today quickly,
Yep.
and learning from it, bringing costs down, and that's the only way you're going to scale, right? It's the same thing that happened in solar or wind. You got to start somewhere.
I feel like
And
that's
then you
such a
scale.
good example of a way to do something simple. I'm not saying it's simple, but it feels it's a great idea. Are other companies doing that as well?
Yes, there are.
Okay,
others.
good, 'cause
we are not the only one. We are kind of in one of the earlier ones.
Okay.
Doing it. We've already brought it to market now 3 weeks probably. We've been now active, operational rather. But there are others doing it. I mean, I think this natural gas processing related CO2 being captured and sequestered is something you probably can see.
Yeah, that's going to accelerate
in the near term because it's one
a
that
great idea.
works.
Yeah. And the question about, are we doing old pipes with CO2 or are we creating new pipes? How does it mechanically work?
It'll be a combination. So if you have relatively new, well-maintained existing pipelines,
Yes.
you could use it for
Okay.
CO2 service, but under low pressure,
Okay.
okay?
Which means lower volumes.
Which means lower volumes.
Okay.
You need bigger pipelines to move lower volumes. Whereas new build pipelines will be built under high pressure pipelines. You call it dense phase, where you're pressuring the CO2 to a point where it's kind of
Almost.
between a gas and a liquid.
Okay.
So you can move much more volumes. For that, you generally have to build
Okay.
new pipelines.
And so your project with Exxon probably means new pipe in the ground then?
It's a combination.
Combination, okay.
And just, I know we're going to move on here, but that project is only about 3 weeks old, a month old, somewhere in that active.
The North Texas BKV project, yes.
I would love to come back to you guys in a year and just figure out how great that went and just see this is what we're able to do. Because those are the kind of metrics that you can say, look, North Texas, this is the kind of difference we're actually making.
Correct.
I feel like that's going to be such a great number that the industry needs to hear about. That people need to understand the oil and gas industry, the midstream industry is making out there. So we're going to try to see if we can remember.
There we go. We'll
come back
remember.
on that.
We'll remember for sure.
Yeah.
When so you've got a couple of specific projects you're working on and have announced. I'm sure there are others. Help us and our listeners with, just the general economics around carbon capture, because I feel like we've talked about this a lot, but I don't know that we've covered it post IRA, which I think makes such a difference. But who gets what in this process? You got emitters, you got transporters, you got sequesterers. Who gets what slice of the pie?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. There are three big components here: the capture bit, the transport, and the sequestration, right? So the goal is to try to minimize the costs in all three segments, right? Now, in the Gulf Coast, we have this rather unique situation where we have sequestration sites in pretty close proximity to emission sources.
Because that's just the geology.
That's just the geology,
Okay.
right? And it's kind of going back to kind of the earlier days when I started looking at this. That's the kind of the trifecta you need to get this going now before you start moving CO2, hundreds and thousands of miles away. So when you think about those three segments, the sequestration and transport part of it is probably the easier. I'm not saying it's easier one to kind of get your head around, because ultimately it's about a sequestration site development, strat well, and then ultimately an injection well. And it's all about what kind of scale you can sequester and how long and how much CO2 you can put in that under that wellbore, right? So that will determine how much it's going to cost to do the sequestration part. The pipeline is unsurprisingly what's the distance?
Yeah.
How much CO2 are you going to flow through it? The capture part is the harder part because not all CO2 emissions are created equal. So different processes have different costs to capture it. So you can bifurcate CO2 sources very broadly into two categories: pre-combustion and post-combustion. Pre-combustion means you haven't combusted it yet.
Yeah,
so therefore it's a pure you can separate the CO2 from, say the natural gas stream, for an example, or any other stream, and then you have a pure stream of CO2 that's coming out, and that is actually cheaper to capture. The post-combustion is when the fuel has been burned. So the coal has been burned or the natural gas has been burned. And now from the flue gas, you're trying to capture the CO2 and then
lower concentrations.
That's right. So that is more expensive. And that also further differentiates between what process you're looking at. So the focus today, I think, is more on the pre-combustion sources, like the natural
project
gas
in Texas.
That's right. As well as kind of ethanol production is one of them. SMR, ATR, steam methane reforming, autothermal reforming in the production of hydrogen, and then ammonia is another opportunity. So that's what people in this sector call maybe the low-hanging fruit. So that's what needs to be focused on first. That is the more expensive part. Now the $85 45Q, so that is the policy incentive you have today, $85 per ton of CO2 sequestered. And you have that for 12 years from the time you start. Okay. From that 85, the majority of that goes into the capture bit.
Okay.
And the transport and the storage is probably
so more than half of the pie, more than half of that $85 a ton.
Correct.
Is going to go to the capture piece because you got to build a big facility or something.
That's right.
Unless you're capturing this pre-combustion.
Right. And again, it depends how much of that pie goes. That depends on is it pre-combustion, post-combustion, etc. Right? But the reality is, for most post-combustion CO2 emissions, the $85 credit doesn't still work.
It's not enough.
It's not enough.
It's not enough.
So two things need to happen. Either that needs to increase, or it can stay the same. Somebody is willing to pay more.
The emitter has to say, I will pay to capture the CO2 because
Correct.
I want to do good or whatever it is.
Feels like that's back to your first question. People want to do well, it's just at what cost?
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right. So what's your injection volumes in Texas are roughly how much?
It's about 210,000 tons a year.
And a big project, a big project would be what, 1 million tons a year, or?
That's right. So some of these sequestration sites, typically, to have a scalable sequestration site, you need to have, kind of per well, 1 to 2 million kind of tons, and then you have to have like a couple of those wells.
Right.
So most of the scalable sequestration sites that are being developed kind of generally talk about 4 to 6, 8 tons a year of sequestration.
Million tons, right?
Million tons. Sorry, 4 to 6 to 8 million tons of sequestration capability per year.
Yeah. So in this Mississippi River corridor that you were talking about, there's 80 million tons of emissions. We're going to need 8 or 10 projects to handle that if it were all to be sequestered. So that's the prize for you guys, is you're going to move all that. You want to move all that around.
That's right. So our kind of stated aspiration is to be the CO2 transporter of choice in the state of Louisiana, particularly around the Mississippi River corridor, which is our backyard.
Yeah. So carbon capture, moving CO2 around, that is clearly the thing that EnLink's doing, having success with right now and focused on. But You mentioned a minute ago, you mentioned hydrogen, you mentioned ammonia. Where do those stand relative to carbon capture in terms of opportunities? It feels more expensive, but is it much earlier? Is it never going to happen? How do you think about things like hydrogen?
Yeah. So if you were to talk about hydrogen for a bit, Dan, I think you've heard me say this before. We've got to think about, the use of hydrogen and how it'll compete with its other competitors for that intended use, right? So what I mean by that is, if you were to think about clean hydrogen for use in vehicles, in light-duty vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, for an example, well, you have strong competition from EVs, which are just beginning
lithium battery
EVs, which is just beginning to compete now with ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles, right? So there you have a strong competitor. So will hydrogen win there?
I'll say no.
Yeah, unlikely.
Yeah.
But in some applications, in very heavy heat applications, in kind of steel making, for an example, direct reduction iron is one of the, steel making is, 7 to 9% of global emissions and is one of the hardest to decarbonize. Now there, hydrogen actually could play a role because it doesn't have many other options for decarbonizing steel, right? If you think about, ammonia, for an example, they're in Japan, they're trialing co-burning ammonia in coal-fired power generators in an effort to reduce the carbon intensity of that coal-fired power plants. That's an example of when that could win. So
using it as a drop-in fuel almost.
That's right. That's right. So the pace and scale of the development of hydrogen, clean hydrogen, will depend on, are we able to match that production with the right and most efficient use, right? And of course, in the US, again, the IRA through the 45V has some policy support for clean hydrogen, both green hydrogen, which is the electrolysis-based production, as well as blue hydrogen, which is SMR, ATR with carbon capture. And particularly in blue hydrogen, there is some evidence that the economics kind of begin to work, and there are multiple projects announced. There are 3 or 4 projects that's actually FID'd, so to produce hydrogen and either use it as hydrogen or to convert to ammonia to be exported overseas.
So it's getting closer.
It's getting closer, but I think carbon capture, it feels the path to scalable deployment there is a bit sooner than in hydrogen. Now, how does it connect to what we do? Again, like what I like to say is, as the sources and uses of hydrogen grows, right? Hydrogen has particularly so far been used in petroleum refineries and in fertilizer applications, right? But now hydrogen is going to be used in energy applications, for an example, right? So the uses are growing. Sources of hydrogen is growing from the traditional use. We have about 75 million MTPA of hydrogen produced in the world today. That'll grow with SMR, ATR technology, with carbon capture, electrolysis, etc. So when more hydrogen gets produced, what do you need to do? You need to move it. You need to store it. You have to export it. Say as ammonia, for an example. Well, what that needs again is infrastructure, pipeline, storage, terminals, etc. So I think again, opportunity for midstream companies to play in that space, to kind of to build the enabling infrastructure to get that hydrogen economy going.
Interesting.
I am just looking at this, Dan. This is the most well-prepped conversation we've ever had. Have you paid attention to these notes that we've made? And I'm looking at your notes. This is excellent. We are on track.
Josh can't believe it.
We never do this. We usually bounce all over the place. I'm having a hard time I'm like, where are we? This has just been remarkable. This is great.
Well, Dan did send me some bullet points this morning.
It's unbelievable.
I gave him 37 minutes to prepare.
That's right.
So
that's all you get.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, we're doing great.
The next one on our scheduled list is game changers. I mean, which really means
It is.
Yeah, which really means innovation, right? And so, in the seats you've been in for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, what do you look out there and say, I got to keep my eye on this? And it doesn't necessarily have to be something EnLink's doing, but I mean, you've looked at a lot
Your
of
2017 brain.
Yeah.
Where you said, this is where it's going to go.
Yeah.
All the way. What have you learned?
Look, I think this might disappoint you, but there isn't like one silver bullet, I think, right? I think CCS probably is emerging, at least in my mind, as one of the more scalable opportunities. Like if you take a step back, if you were to think about the kind of the world energy landscape and just do the math is actually quite brutal, right? A shift away from hydrocarbons is just not feasible because of the growing energy demands in the world.
With speed, you're saying.
With speed, right? Now, at least for the next couple of decades. Now, over time, yes, that'll happen, particularly as renewable power, wind, solar, etc., continues to grow. So therefore, the challenge then is, how do we today make this more sustainable, reduce the emission footprint of those processes, and carbon capture probably offers kind of the best scalable, near-term solution. If we prove to ourselves that we can capture, transport, and store it safely, and that's up to us to do that well over the next couple of years, and that's what'll help it scale. Of course, I think wind and solar, the electrification team will continue to do its thing. I think batteries will play a big role in that to solve the intermittency issue. And I think, battery costs are coming down and new kind of battery chemistries are being developed. I think there'll be a lot of technological innovation there to maybe rely less on the more insecure supply chains. And then, of course, I'm secretly hoping it's kind of nuclear will somehow emerge over the next couple of decades, though it doesn't seem to be anything here in a hurry. Now, if we can figure out a way to kind of bring down the costs of clean hydrogen production and use that more in kind of the heavier heat applications, which are very emissions intensive, I mean, that could play a part as well. So I think the answer is, if there is a breakthrough, I think it should be in the coordination. There is a coordination issue. How do we, put the right solution to the right problem versus looking for this silver bullet that solves everything? I'm afraid that's difficult. I promised to come back to diesel earlier on in the conversation, right? So we looked at, okay, what might we be able to use instead of diesel? And CNG, LNG, hydrogen, ammonia, trolley assist, batteries. All of this is very, very difficult, very uneconomic today. Now, over time, that could emerge. And that's where renewable diesel was one of those not massively scalable, but an option we have today as a drop-in fuel, right? Began to make sense. But that's a difficult nut to crack, particularly for heavy-duty vehicles. It's very diesel intensive, and it'll continue to be so.
So I'm going to take away wind, solar, storage, batteries, storage, and CCUS as the kind of the big four.
With an asterisk towards nuclear.
Well, I mean, I think nuclear, hydrogen, nuclear, in my opinion, I'm breaking the rule of being a podcast host and throwing out my own opinion as opposed to asking the guest. But nuclear is a timing issue, not a technical issue. Hydrogen's a technical issue, technical economic issue from my perspective. And both of them seem to be take some time.
Well, I'm going to take away here that one of the things you said was a coordination issue. Excuse me. And actually, earlier in the podcast, when I was listening to you talk about your career, you have such a cool career, and I'm not just saying this because you're in front of me. It's unique. It's unique because it's oil and gas related, and you're a supply chain guy with some sales and whatnot. And I thought to myself as you were talking, I thought it reminded me of that book Outliers, the Malcolm Gladwell book, and how it's usually these people with these where a set of circumstances and then timing happens, and that timing usually equates to their moment of opportunity to step into something. And if they have the moment of opportunity and they're given and they step in, they can do great things. And so you were describing your background in Sri Lanka to Georgia to Houston is a very uncommon background.
That's right.
And then within there, the pipeline to oil and gas to frack to this is an uncommon career path. And so you're describing that, I thought it's going to take something like this to understand all the different moving pieces of a puzzle. So then when you said the coordination issue, I really thought, I wonder if he sees the irony in his path to be able to see that there is that coordination moment. So, there's someone that's going to hear this that has some crazy background that I don't know if they view it as an opportunity for them, but it's going to be someone like that you and others that you're bringing up, et cetera, that I hope that they hear this. And I'm glad that you said that, because actually I think that's a really good point is, we don't know who's going to make the difference, but it's going to be somebody that we don't expect that has all these different puzzle pieces that they're able to coordinate it. So that's what I'm taking out of it.
Or it will be Elon Musk that does it, because he does everything.
He does everything.
Yeah.
So it's either him or somebody with a unique background. So
Elon, Dilanka, or someone.
That's right. I think that's the first time and probably the last
there you go.
time those two names will be in the same sentence.
Maybe not.
What advice do you give you're a traditional oil and gas person, energy person that's kind of transitioned into this lower carbon environment. You got any advice to others who want to do that, or what do you say to 30-year-olds that want to?
Look, I think I would say, try to get kind of different experiences. Josh, you mentioned earlier kind of the Outliers book, etc. I think you have to try to get different sets of experiences that'll help you get kind of different vantage points. That's going to help, I think, in this coordination issue, because if you do only one thing, then it's difficult sometimes to see kind of other points of view. So I think a diverse experience set probably is one thing. To keep an open mind is one of these things. Like, I think if you particularly when you think about the evolution of the energy system, I don't think anyone can say, hey, it's going to be this way or the other way. I think you had to think in kind of frameworks, you had to think in scenarios. What are the various scenarios the world ends up being in 2050, and what's the energy mix in each of those scenarios, right? And then if you're driving towards one scenario versus another, then you have a differentiated energy mix. So to keeping an open mind about that, I think, just say, oh, that'll never work, or this is the only way it'll happen, I think will be counterproductive. And then the other one is kind of staying the course. Dan, when we saw each other earlier this week in the Heart event, where they kind of honored or called these captains of industry, so to speak, one of my takeaways was that, man, these guys been at it for a long time.
Yes.
And has seen ups and downs. There were times, think about someone like Harold Hamm or Audrey Stevens. Like, these guys have just, right? And they've just stuck to it for decades and decades and decades, right? That's how you find long-term success. That's how you do difficult things, right? And so that's actually been a takeaway for me from that event. No need to get too excited nor too discouraged by anything.
Stick at it.
You have to just stick at it.
Great point.
That's a good one too.
Yeah.
That's really good. Let's finish with a change of topic. So your bio, you're on the board of Houston's Big Brothers Big Sisters organization. I don't know if that means you have been or are a big brother, but give us a feel-good story around Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I started volunteering with Big Brothers Big Sisters in 2009, so 14 years ago, as a big brother. So I had a brother. And one thing that led me to that is because I've been just the beneficiary of a lot of people's goodwill. I mentioned Paula early on, who kind of was my mentor and really gave me a shot in the energy business. And since then, I've had many bosses, many colleagues, who's really, especially as someone who came to this country without a network, so to speak, not knowing anyone, no one that my parents could call for to give me advice or a favor.
Right.
I had to rely on folks who just took me under their wing, just out of the goodness of their hearts. So my earlier insight when I started volunteering was that's a way to give back. And then as I got into it is when I realized how much, even in a city like Houston, which is kind of pretty well endowed, lot of good industry, low unemployment rate,
Lots
economic
of resources,
prosperity, lots of resources, the amount of adversity that some young children face, and there are children in Houston that are food insecure, which means they don't have a consistent 3 meals a day. There are kids in Houston who hasn't been on an escalator, right? Why? Because they may have never needed to go to one of these buildings because they don't know anyone who works there. So these are kind of experiences I've heard through it, and Big Brothers Big Sisters just plays an amazing role in providing one-to-one matching between these kids kind of who face adversity, and match them with a mentor who will help them realize their fullest potential. So it's an organization I've been involved with a long time. I joined the board about 11 years ago, been on the board since, and I really enjoy it. It's kind of, I started as maybe a way of giving back, but then now it's got to a point where it's very much part of my identity. A lot of my friends are through this organization, and I'll plug this, Dan. Next year, my wife and I are chairing the gala for Big Brothers Big Sisters, so it's going to be next October, and it's going to be a great time.
October 24. We'll put it on the calendar.
Absolutely.
Right. I was a big brother 25 years ago.
Nice.
Yeah,
It's cool.
It's a great organization.
It's a great thing.
Let us know on that. We'll promote it over here too.
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So now we get to thank you for all of the insights into the energy business and
Great story.
and so we do our lightning round, which
we don't mess around.
yeah, this is the hard-hitting conclusion of our podcast, and the only rule is you only get to give, Josh says number one word answer.
Yes or
no.
Okay.
A, B, no explanation. It helps us get to know you better as we finish up here. So you want to kick it off, Josh?
Yes. Work from the office or work from home?
Office.
Pizza or hamburgers?
Pizza.
Barbie or Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer.
Wind or solar?
Solar.
Carbon capture or hydrogen?
Carbon capture.
Taylor Swift or U2?
U2.
Nice. Okay. Will the world hit net zero by 2050?
No.
He is really good
Definitive.
at this.
Definitive.
Yeah,
I like
great.
it. So many people waffle. Well, then he's following the rules. I like
Yes,
it.
he
Cash
is.
or crypto?
Cash.
Disney Plus or Netflix?
Netflix.
The S&P 500 for 2024. Are you bullish or bearish?
Bullish.
F-150 or a Ford Lightning?
F-150.
Tokyo or Rio?
I like both those cities very much. Tokyo.
Does the you take these next two and I'll get this last one here. That way you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does the Ukraine conflict continue beyond June of 24?
Yes.
What about the Israel-Hamas conflict? Same time frame, June 24.
Yes.
Yes to both.
Another IRA type bill in the next 3 years?
No.
And the most important question, will the Houston, and the only consistent question in the lightning round,
Your
will the
level of
Houston
friendship with
Texans
Dan.
make the Super Bowl in the next decade? He wants to say no. He looked at me and laughed.
No, if you live here, yes. Of
Thank
course
you.
is the
There you
answer.
go, buddy.
Yes.
Dilanka Seimon.
Higher than chance of meeting net zero in 2050.
That's a really good way to put it. And I also agree with that too. The website's www.enlink.com. Dilanka Seimon, thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.
A lot of fun.
Great
Cheers.
job. Have a great holiday season here as well.
You too. Yep.